in economics was won in part by Eleanor Ostrom for her work on the commons. I mean, it's a big deal right now. And it's interesting to see, in the light of this cataclysmic economic crash, that economists are paying attention to this kind of thing. And so the question is, all right, well, what do we take from the commons? Well, we take maybe two basic rules. One is that we need to live within our means. We need to live with the consequences of our economic actions so that we can have feedback. So when things go wrong, we learn from them and we adjust our behavior. And the other thing is, of course, that we have a way of holding, when we organize, holding ourselves accountable and being responsible for those actions, rather than living with the consequences of someone else's economic actions. Now, in many of the communities that common, you have both of those things. You have people live with the consequences, and they know where the responsibility lies. I certainly think that those are things that we can and should be inspired by. And in Toronto, there are already ways in which we are starting to live within our economic means. And for me, one of the things I keep coming back to is food, because food is not only a vital resource in every sense of that word, but also a way in which we can start to live within, to match our political and our ecological footprints. To match, in other words, the domains in which we make economic, social, political, and environmental decisions. For those those set of things to be congruent with one another in a way that is democratic. And so I'm very excited by things like the Toronto Food Policy Council. I'm excited by initiatives that look fairly benign. Food Policy Council, it's not revolutionary, it's not about seizing the means of production. But what it is about is figuring out ways in which public space can be used and be transformed, and in which government policy can be accountable and again transformed to more accurately match the food sheds in which we live. Now, that, again, it seems pretty benign, and yet it turns out that there are increasingly revolutionary ideas that come from the idea of a food commons, where we do start to be democratically to take a much more plastic attitude to private property, so that we can take this resource and use it in ways that are much more sustainable.
Have you seen our 5-cent plastic shopping bag policy?
I have not seen our 5 cent.
Yes. If you're buying in grocery stores and convenience stores, you now have to pay 5 cents, which sounds like nothing, and maybe they should move up the price, but I find that even that 5 cent to me is a reason to keep lots and lots of plastic shopping bags around for recycling.
Well, I mean, and there is this kind of policy move, and certainly in the United States, the idea that we are basically irrational creatures, and what we need to needs to happen is that we need to be nudged towards the right decision, and that 5 cents is a nudge, and that's right. I mean, I think we are irrational creatures. We do need to be nudged, but I think we also need to be in control of much more than just being jostled one way or another by price mechanisms, and to set that nudge only in the domain of prices, whether it's being nudged by tax breaks towards buying a pension, or nudged by the 5 cents towards a grocery bag. That's sort of democracy light, where in fact we're being jostled one way or another by market forces. We're not really relying on our faculties of rational choice. We're still relying on impulse. We're relying on our sort of pre-rational faculties to be moved one way or another. And that is a very sort of eviscerated kind of democratic choice making. I do think that we need much more of the deliberative kinds of democracy that that we've been denied in many ways so far.
Do you see anything going on in California where you're living now that gives you hope?
Well, actually, I mean, in many ways, it's sort of patterned on what's happening in Toronto. I mean, again, the Oakland food policy. I mean, for me, it does come back to food a lot, partly because that's the thing that moves me and where my passions lie. But it's also where
you do have this stuffed and starved.
Indeed, and that's but again, it comes back to issues around justice and the market. I mean, in the United States, in 2008, 49.2 million Americans were food insecure. Let me run that number by you again. 49.2 million Americans were food insecure in 2008, and the figure, according to a Gallup survey conducted last year, is even higher. Now that the recession has got its teeth into the average American family. That's a lot of people. and it's a real problem in terms of in terms of human life in America. And so what's exciting to me in the United States, where you see all kinds of batshit crazy stuff going on, where you've got the tea baggers, for example.
That's food.
It's, again, a very pale imitation of the kind of Boston Tea Party that got America going in the first place. But you see all kinds of madness, and yet you see some really interesting organizing happening on the left that isn't sort of floating in the air ideological posturing, but is meeting the real needs of real people who are going hungry in the country, and this is the way that all organizing, to my mind, has succeeded, not through the publishing of pamphlets, but through the meeting of concrete needs and building from that kind of a platform. And so the organizing around hunger in California is, for me, very exciting, because again, it's a concrete platform that isn't just about filling a gap that the government ought to have been filling, but using that gap as part of an organizing initiative to not only address local needs, but also to address national policy, and also to start thinking about the US's role in creating hunger elsewhere. And this is the kind of organizing and the kinds of behavior that Martin Luther King was very excited about soon, sadly, towards the end of his life, where he was talking about not only caring for the beggars in life's marketplace, but also asking why society produces beggars. And so this movement from addressing very concrete needs of hunger to moving to address why it is that hunger is being produced is the kind of organizing that I'm very excited by in California and here.
Okay, just a little bit personal, I guess. What got you into talking and writing about these things, and are you an activist in your life, and do you get involved with political works?
Yeah, there's nothing special about me. Like every kid, if you go into any playground, the taunt or the wail that you will most likely hear is one of "that's not fair." So that's me. As a kid, there is a particular moment that is sort of seared into my mind. And I was very young, and I was in India, and my parents had taken me to visit the land of my ancestors, so that they were trying to shake some of the language into me. We were at a stoplight, and we were inside a cab, and we were heading somewhere. And on the stop, at the stoplight, there was a girl who was 14 maybe, and she had in her arms a little baby, and the baby was screaming and screaming and screaming, and she was knocking and knocking and knocking at the window, and she was asking for money. And the scream and the knocking and the scream and the knocking, and all of a sudden I was screaming, and I was screaming and screaming and screaming, and I was asking, why is she outside and why are we inside, and why does she have no money and why do we have money? And there's no good answer to that question. There's never been any good answer to that question, and that little girl I carry with me wherever I go, and I'll never know her name, and we gave her money and we drove away, and that's why I do what I do, and there's nothing special about that. Everyone has that, but I guess it's just a case of taking that and doing something with it, and often we have that knocked out of us by the imperatives of having to work and having to live our lives. And I've been lucky to be in a situation where I've been able to follow that a little bit. And yes, I do get involved in political action, and I recently became a United States citizen. And part of the reason I did that is so that I don't, when I get arrested on protest, I won't get deported. That's not something that I mentioned in the interview, but that's, I think it's safe to say that now. Right, that's safe to say that.
Your child will grow up in America too, as a citizen.
And yet, I was protesting last week about Haiti and about the way in which U.S. aid to Haiti is barbarous. The idea that the U.S. would lock down the airport and now that the U.S. would suspend transports because of a cost dispute is unconscionable. And the only way that the U.S. and sort of people say, you go out on these protests, what good does it do? Well,